Lady Whistledown speaking, and tonight my quill trembles with anticipation. Within the grand halls of Graftonwood, where chandeliers gleam upon marble secrets, a most curious tale unfolds, one of love lost, fate reborn, and the bond that dares to defy time itself. They say the Duke's little heir drove away every governess in London, until the day he clung to a quiet maid and called her mother. But when the Duke himself heard that forbidden word echo through Graftonwood's halls, an old ghost stirred to life. Now scandal tiptoes where love once bloomed, and every whispered secret threatens to unravel the noble house entire. Tell me, listeners, when truth and propriety collide, which will survive the night? If this tale has already captured your curiosity, do subscribe, my dear listeners, and whisper to me in the comments from which corner of the world you listen tonight. Now then, let us turn the page and see how fate begins its wicked little game. The Duke of Graftonwood, that towering figure of masculine authority known simply as Jared, a man whose very presence commands rooms to fall silent, whose cold blue eyes have never betrayed a moment's weakness to the Ton's relentless scrutiny. Yet this same Duke, this paragon of controlled nobility, finds himself utterly confounded by his own son and heir. Little Owen, barely 6 years of age, possesses what the servants whisper to be an uncanny gift. The child seems to peer directly into one's soul, with eyes far too knowing for his tender years. More troubling still, young Owen has driven away no fewer than 7 governesses in as many months. Each woman, hand-selected from the finest families, educated in the most prestigious academies, has fled Graftonwood in tears, claiming the boy to be unnatural and disturbing. But here lies the scandal that has my attention utterly captivated. This same child, who rejects every woman deemed suitable to guide his education, clings with desperate affection to a mere maid, a quiet creature named Tahlia, who arrived at the estate 3 months past with references so modest they barely warranted notice. I watched from my carriage just yesterday as young Owen wrapped his small arms around this woman's dark wool skirts, pressing his face against her apron with such fierce devotion that even the hardest heart might soften. "Mama," he whispered, and though the servants exchanged knowing glances, none dare correct the boy's curious attachment. Yet Tahlia did not protest his claim. Instead, she knelt to his level, her pale hands that seemed almost too refined for her station, smoothing his dark hair with a tenderness that spoke of something deeper than duty. Her lips moved in what appeared to be a gentle song, though no sound reached my ears from where I observed. The Duke himself stood in the doorway, his jaw clenched tight as granite. For a moment, just a moment, I glimpsed something raw and vulnerable cross his features before that familiar mask of indifference slammed back into place. He turned on his heel and strode away, but not before I caught the confusion that flickered in his storm-grey eyes. What curious alchemy is this, that a child should recognize what his father cannot see? What recognition passes between a boy who knows nothing of deception and a woman whose very presence seems to haunt these halls like a living ghost? The servants at Graftonwood speak in hushed tones of the woman's strange arrival. She came bearing a letter of recommendation from a convent in the north, a place so remote that verification proves nearly impossible. Mother Superior claimed the woman had lost her voice to illness, rendering her mute as a dove. Yet her silence seems less affliction than choice, as though words themselves might betray secrets too dangerous to speak. More intriguing still, this Tahlia moves through the estate with an otherworldly grace, her posture speaking of refinement that no amount of training could instill in common blood. Though her brown hair is always severely pinned beneath a simple cap, and her features deliberately obscured by harsh shadows, I catch glimpses of bone structure that might once have graced society's most elegant ballrooms. But perhaps most mysterious of all is the way she watches the Duke when she believes no one notices. Her dark eyes follow his movements with desperate intensity, as though she memorizes each gesture against some future loss. And when their paths cross in the corridors, which happens with suspicious frequency, she takes great care to keep her face averted, though I sense recognition crackling in the air between them like summer lightning. The Duke, for his part, has grown increasingly agitated since her arrival. Cook reports he barely touches his meals, and his valet whispers of sleepless nights spent pacing his chambers. His betrothal to the beautiful Celeste proceeds according to schedule, yet he seems more haunted than joyful as their wedding approaches. I confess, dear listeners, this puzzle has captured my imagination completely. For what power does a silent maid possess that can enchant a child while unsettling his father so completely? What secret hides beneath her humble brown dress and carefully downcast eyes? And why does young Owen's supernatural intuition recognize truth that eludes everyone else? The Ton delights in mysteries, particularly those involving our most prominent families. Yet something tells me this tale runs deeper than mere scandal. It touches upon those fundamental truths that govern the human heart, truths that neither title nor fortune can command. Tell me, dear listeners, could even you resist the urge to uncover what binds these three souls together in their dance of recognition and concealment? Allow me to paint for you the portrait of our Duke, dear listeners, for Jared embodies every contradiction that makes the human heart such a fascinating study. Stand him in any ballroom, and he becomes the still centre around which all else revolves. 6 feet of controlled power wrapped in midnight black evening wear, his golden hair swept back from features that might have been carved by a master sculptor. Yet I have learned to read the language of grief, and this man wears it like an invisible cloak. 3 years passed. Whispers spoke of a great love lost. A woman whose very name has been scrubbed from conversation, as though she never existed. The servants who dared speak of her have long since been dismissed, and even the portraits that once graced the family gallery have mysteriously vanished. Since that unnamed tragedy, Jared has transformed into a creature of rigid routine and icy control. He takes his morning ride at precisely 8, conducts estate business until noon, and spends his afternoons in that tomb-like study where no servant dares disturb him. The warmth that once lit his eyes when he smiled has been replaced by a winter that never quite thaws. His treatment of his son borders on the tragically formal. Owen receives every material advantage: the finest tutors, the most expensive toys, chambers decorated like a prince's palace. Yet what the boy craves most, his father's tender attention, remains perpetually out of reach. I have witnessed Jared watching his son from doorways, his expression unguarded in those stolen moments, revealing a longing so profound it made my heart ache. Enter our mysterious Talia, who has spent these 3 months studying every corner of Graftonwood with the dedication of a woman on a sacred mission. What the household does not know, what even I have only recently discovered through careful observation, is that she came here with deliberate purpose, drawn by a mother's desperate need to see her child. For Talia is no common servant seeking employment, but a woman whose past connects her to this house in ways that would shatter the very foundations of polite society if discovered. The years have changed her. Harsh treatment has sharpened her features. Hardship has aged her beyond her years. And deliberate disguise has transformed her into someone unrecognizable, even to those who once knew her intimately. Watch her hands as she works. They move with practiced grace that speaks of finer breeding, yet they also bear the calluses and scars of recent hardship. Her posture, though carefully controlled to suggest humility, occasionally betrays the unconscious elegance of someone born to command rather than serve. Most telling of all is her knowledge of the house itself. She navigates its passages with the familiarity of long residence, not recent employment. Lorene, whose 40 years of service have made her keeper of all household secrets, has begun to watch Talia with growing suspicion. "That one knows things," she confided to me yesterday. "Knows where the master keeps his private papers, knows which floorboards creak, knows the patterns of this house like she lived here for years." But it is with young Owen that Talia's true nature reveals itself. The child, with his supernatural perception, recognizes what his rational elders cannot grasp, that this woman belongs to him in ways deeper than mere service. I watched them yesterday in the garden, where she knelt to tend his scraped knee with such fierce protectiveness that my breath caught in recognition. "Why do you take care of me?" Owen asked, his small voice carrying that peculiar directness children possess. "The other ladies were frightened of me." Talia paused in her ministrations, her hands trembling slightly as she cleaned his small wound. Though she maintained her characteristic silence, her eyes blazed with such fierce love that the truth seemed written across her features for anyone with eyes to see. "I know you're special," Owen continued, pressing his small hand to her cheek. "You feel like home, like belonging. Papa says my mama went to heaven, but I think heaven sent her back to me." What followed next revealed the depth of this woman's sacrifice. Talia gathered Owen into her arms, holding him with the desperate tenderness of someone who has been denied this precious contact for far too long. Silent tears streamed down her face as she rocked him gently, her lips moving in what could only have been words of love too dangerous to speak aloud. The tragedy of their situation struck me with devastating force. Here was a mother, disguised beyond recognition, serving in her own home while her child called her mama without knowing the truth of his words. Here was a woman who dared not claim her rightful place for fear of the scandal that would destroy the very family she had returned to protect. For Jared's engagement to Celeste represents more than mere political alliance. It offers stability for Owen, security for the dukedom, and respectability that Talia's presence would shatter completely. Whatever circumstances drove her from this house 3 years past, whatever tragedy or disgrace forced her into exile, she has returned not to reclaim her former life, but simply to love her son from the shadows. The Duke himself remains completely oblivious to the drama unfolding under his roof. Yesterday evening, I observed him pausing outside the nursery door, drawn by the sound of his son's rare laughter. Through the crack, he glimpsed what I saw. Talia and Owen seated by the fire, she humming wordlessly while he played at her feet. For several minutes, Jared stood frozen, his breathing growing laboured as though some buried memory fought to surface. When Talia's soft humming reached his ears, he gripped the doorframe with white knuckles, his face cycling through confusion and impossible recognition before his rational mind dismissed what his heart had almost grasped. The careful distance she maintains, the artful way she disguises her features, the studied humility of her bearing, all serve to protect a secret that grows more precarious with each passing day. The threads of fate often pull tightest in the quiet hours before dawn, when the world lies suspended between dreams and waking. It was during such a moment that destiny chose to test the careful boundaries that had kept truth hidden within the walls of Graftonwood for 3 long months. Young Owen had fallen victim to one of those fierce childhood fevers that strike without warning, leaving him restless and crying for comfort that his father's stiff formality could not provide. The nursery rang with his plaintive sobs throughout the night, despite the ministrations of 2 different physicians and a nurse imported from London's most prestigious children's hospital. Jared paced the corridors like a caged wolf, his usual composure cracking under the weight of helpless paternal anguish. I observed from my vantage point in the guest wing as he approached the nursery door repeatedly, only to retreat when faced with his son's need for the kind of tender comfort he had forgotten how to give. It was Loreen who finally summoned Talia from the servants' quarters. "The child asks for you," she explained with characteristic brevity, though her sharp eyes held questions she dared not voice. Perhaps your gentle touch might succeed where medicine has failed? What followed, listeners, will forever remain etched in the chambers of my memory. Talia entered that nursery with the fluid grace of a woman returning to her natural domain, her carefully maintained disguise forgotten in the face of her child's distress. Owen's fevered cries ceased the moment she crossed the threshold, his small arms reaching for her with the desperate recognition of a son for his mother. She gathered the boy into her arms with practiced ease, settling into the rocking chair beside his bed. For several moments, she simply held him, her pale hands smoothing his damp hair, while his small body gradually relaxed against the warmth he had unconsciously craved his entire young life. Then, in her desperation to comfort him, Talia made the fateful choice that would change everything. She began to sing. Though she had maintained careful silence throughout her months at Graftonwood, her voice rose soft and clear in the lamplit nursery. The melody that spilled from her lips was no common lullaby learned from books or nurses, but something far more precious. A song of love crafted by a mother's heart during those precious months before tragedy separated them. The words, when they came, spoke of starlight and dreams, of brave little boys who conquered dragons and always found their way home. Her voice carried the warm honey of genuine affection, each note a caress that seemed to draw the fever from Owen's small frame and replace it with perfect peace. But it was not merely the beauty of her song that stopped the world. It was the devastating familiarity of it to the man who stood frozen in the doorway. Jared had approached to check on his son's condition, but the sound of that voice, that particular melody, struck him like a physical blow. His powerful frame trembled as though struck by lightning, one hand gripping the doorframe while the other pressed against his chest, as if to still a heart gone wild with impossible recognition. This was the lullaby his lost love had hummed during their brief, perfect marriage. These were the words she had whispered about their unborn child, the promises she had made about the family they would create together. Every note, every phrase, every tender inflection was branded upon his memory with the precision of sacred text. "Sleep now, my darling," Talia whispered, her voice growing softer as Owen's breathing deepened into peaceful slumber. "Dream of tomorrow's adventures, of sunshine and laughter. Dream of the love that surrounds you, even when you cannot see it." The Duke's intake of breath was audible in the sudden silence. These exact words, this precise blessing, had been his wife's nightly gift to her unborn son, spoken with her hands pressed lovingly to her growing belly. The impossibility of it crashed over him like waves against a crumbling seawall, each recognition bringing fresh devastation. Talia's head turned toward the doorway with the slow inevitability of fate itself. In the lamplight, with her guard completely down and love blazing unguarded in her dark eyes, the careful disguise that had hidden her identity for 3 months dissolved like morning mist. The recognition that passed between them in that electric moment was absolute and devastating. Here was no humble maid comforting a stranger's child. Here was his wife, his lost love, his heart's other half, singing to the son they had created together in joy and lost to tragedy. Jared's lips moved soundlessly, forming the name that had been forbidden within these walls for 3 years. Though I could not hear his whisper, I read its shape upon his mouth. A word that carried the weight of love, loss, and desperate, impossible hope combined. Talia's response was immediate and heartbreaking. Terror flooded her features as she realized her fatal mistake, her carefully constructed facade lying in ruins around her. She rose carefully, settling Owen beneath his covers with infinite tenderness before moving toward the door, toward the man who blocked her path to escape. For one breathless moment, they stood within arm's reach of each other, the air between them fairly crackling with the force of suppressed emotion. Jared's hand lifted as though to touch her face, to prove her reality through contact, but she stepped aside before he could complete the gesture. "You," Jared breathed, his voice breaking on the single word. "You are alive. You are here. But how?" "I do not know what you're talking about, Your Grace," Talia whispered, her voice hoarse with desperation. She fled the room immediately before he could say something else, but the damage was done. The careful distance of 3 months had been shattered by a mother's song and a father's recognition. Nothing at Graftonwood would ever be the same again. "Oh, if your heart has begun to race as mine does, subscribe. For trust me, the night's secrets have only just begun to unfold." The days following that midnight revelation transformed Graftonwood into a powder keg of barely contained emotion, where every glance, every chance encounter, every moment of proximity threatened to ignite the careful facade that kept impossible love hidden from the world. I positioned myself with strategic care throughout the estate, documenting the exquisite torture of 2 hearts forced to deny their deepest truths. Jared had become a man walking the knife's edge of desperation. Where once he had maintained rigid control over every aspect of his existence, now he moved through his daily routines with the distracted air of someone whose world had shifted on its axis. The morning's correspondence went unread, estate business languished on his desk, and his usually immaculate appearance showed subtle signs of a mind consumed by impossible circumstances. Most telling of all was his new habit of haunting the corridors where Talia might be found performing her duties. Like a man possessed, he would find excuses to pass through the family wing during her cleaning hours, to check the nursery when she tended Owen, to walk the gardens when she aired the linens in the courtyard. Each encounter was a masterpiece of restrained agony. Their eyes meeting for electric moments before she would lower her gaze, and he would force himself to continue on his way. During yesterday's breakfast with his betrothed, the lovely Celeste arrived in a flutter of excitement about their approaching nuptials, her arms full of fabric samples and menu proposals that scattered like autumn leaves when she saw his state. "Jared, darling," she exclaimed, settling beside him with her characteristic warmth. "You look positively haggard. Surely the wedding preparations cannot be so taxing for a man of your capabilities." Through the morning room windows, Talia could be seen hanging laundry in the courtyard, her movements graceful despite the humble nature of her task. Owen had escaped his tutors again and stood beside her, chattering animatedly, while she listened with the patient devotion only a mother could maintain. "Perhaps," Celeste continued, following his distracted gaze, "we should consider hiring additional staff for the nursery. That maid seems overwhelmed by young Owen's energy, and he has grown quite attached to her." The observation struck its target with devastating accuracy. Jared's hand tightened around his teacup until the delicate china creaked under the pressure. "The current arrangement suits Owen perfectly well," he replied with barely controlled tension. "The child has finally found stability. I will not disrupt it for mere convenience." Celeste's blue eyes reflected confusion at his vehemence, but she possessed the well-bred tact to change subjects rather than pursue what clearly distressed him. "Of course, if you feel it best. Though I must confess, I worry about Owen's adjustment to having a new mother. Perhaps if I were to spend more time with him now, before we wed—" "No." The word emerged so sharply that Celeste actually recoiled. Through the window, Talia had gone completely still, her hands frozen in the act of pinning a sheet to the line as though she sensed the conversation's dangerous turn. "Forgive me," Jared amended quickly, forcing his voice to gentler tones. "I merely think it wise to let Owen grow accustomed to change gradually. The boy has known much upheaval in his young life." But his explanation rang hollow even to his own ears. The truth was that he could not bear the thought of replacing Talia in Owen's affections, could not stomach the idea of another woman attempting to fill the space that belonged to his son's true mother. Later that afternoon, Wyatt arrived for their weekly meeting about parliamentary business, only to find his oldest friend in a state that bordered on distraction. Where once their discussions had been models of focused efficiency, now Jared's attention wandered constantly toward the sounds of the household around them. "The education bill requires your signature," Wyatt said patiently, sliding the document across the desk for the third time. "Jared, are you attending me at all?" From somewhere above came the sound of laughter, Owen's delighted giggles mixing with a woman's softer mirth in a way that made Jared's hands clench into fists upon his desk. "Perhaps," Wyatt continued with growing concern, "you should consider a physician's consultation. You appear to be suffering from some form of nervous exhaustion." "I am perfectly well," Jared replied curtly, though his assertion was immediately undermined by the way he started violently when footsteps passed in the corridor outside his study. "Then explain to me," Wyatt pressed, with the privilege of old friendship, "why you have been behaving like a man haunted since that new maid arrived. The servants whisper that you watch her constantly, that you grow agitated whenever she is mentioned, that you forbid anyone to reassign her duties or question her presence here." The accusation hung in the air between them like a drawn blade. For a moment, I thought Jared might confess everything, the impossible truth that his dead wife lived and served under his roof, that every moment of denial was slowly killing him. That love and duty warred in his heart until he could barely function. Instead, he retreated behind the cold authority that had become his shield. "My household arrangements are not subject to commentary or criticism, even from you, Wyatt. The matter is closed." But if Jared suffered in his forced denial, Tatlia endured her own exquisite torment. I observed her that evening as she moved through Owen's bedtime routine with mechanical precision, her usual warmth dimmed by the weight of secrets that grew heavier each day. "Miss Talia," Owen said as she tucked him into bed, for he had never stopped calling her by that forbidden title. "Why does Papa look so sad lately? And why do you cry when you think I'm not watching?" Talia's breath caught audibly at the child's perceptive question. She knelt beside his bed, her hands smoothing his dark hair with infinite tenderness, while tears gathered in her eyes. "Sometimes," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Grown-ups carry sorrows that are too big for little boys to understand. But those sorrows have nothing to do with you, my darling. You are pure joy, perfect love, the brightest light in everyone's world. Even Papa's. Especially Papa's," she assured him, pressing a gentle kiss to his forehead. "He loves you more than his own life, even when his heart is troubled by other things." As she rose to leave, Owen caught her hand in his small fingers. "I wish you could stay forever," he said with the devastating honesty of childhood. "I wish you were really my mama, not just in my heart." The pain that crossed her features was so profound that I had to look away. Here was a mother denied her child, a wife erased from existence, a woman who had sacrificed everything to love from the shadows, while another prepared to take her rightful place. "Some wishes," she replied softly, "are too dangerous to speak aloud. But love doesn't need words to be real, my precious boy. Remember that always. Would you guard your honor or follow your heart, gentle reader? Destiny often arrives wearing the mundane mask of household accidents. It was during a perfectly ordinary afternoon that fate chose to strip away the final veils concealing the truth that had tormented Graftonwood for 3 agonizing months. The day had dawned grey and melancholy, with autumn rain drumming against the library's tall windows where Talia worked alone, dusting the leather-bound volumes that lined the Duke's private sanctuary. Her movements through that room carried the unconscious familiarity of someone who had once commanded every corner of this house, though she maintained the careful deference expected of a servant. I had positioned myself in the adjoining study, ostensibly reviewing correspondence, while actually observing her with the fascination of one who sensed herself witnessing history in the making. When she reached for a particularly heavy volume on the highest shelf, Byron's complete works, bound in midnight blue morocco, the ladder beneath her suddenly shifted with the treacherous unpredictability of fate itself. The crash that followed brought servants running from every corner of the house, their alarmed voices echoing through corridors suddenly charged with crisis. I found Talia crumpled on the Persian carpet, her right hand twisted beneath her at an unnatural angle, while books lay scattered around her like fallen soldiers. Blood seeped through the torn fabric of her sleeve, and her face had gone white as winter moonlight. "Fetch the Duke immediately," Lorene commanded, dropping to her knees beside the injured woman with the efficiency of long service. "And send for Dr. Morrison. Quickly now." But it was Jared himself who arrived first, having heard the commotion from his study. He burst through the library doors with the force of a man driven by terror so profound it stripped away every careful pretense. When he saw Talia lying motionless on the floor, a sound escaped him, part growl, part anguish, that I had never heard from any human throat. "Don't move her," he ordered the assembled servants, dropping to the carpet beside her with complete disregard for his expensive morning coat. His hands hovered over her still form as though afraid his touch might cause further harm. "Can you hear me? Are you conscious?" Her eyes fluttered open at the sound of his voice, revealing dark depths swimming with pain and confusion. For a moment, she seemed startled by his proximity, by the raw concern etched across his aristocratic features without his usual mask of indifference. "Your hand," he whispered, noting the unnatural angle of her wrist. "We must examine the damage properly." With infinite gentleness, he helped her sit upright, supporting her weight against his chest, while Lorene carefully removed the torn glove from her injured hand. The intimacy of the gesture, the Duke of Graftonwood cradling a servant against his body, sent shocked murmurs through the assembled staff. What they revealed beneath that blood-stained glove, however, sent more than murmurs through the room. There, across the back of her right hand, ran a thin white scar in the distinctive shape of a crescent moon. The mark was small, barely the size of a shilling, but I watched understanding dawn in Jared's eyes like sunrise after the longest night. "No," he breathed, his voice barely audible above the rain beating against the windows. "It cannot possibly be." But even as he spoke the denial, his trembling fingers traced the air above that telltale scar, a mark he knew as intimately as his own heartbeat, earned during a riding accident on their wedding day when thorns had torn her delicate skin. He had bandaged that very wound with his own silk cravat, had kissed it better while she laughed at his excessive concern. "Please," Talia whispered, her voice hoarse with desperation as she recognized the dangerous moment of revelation. "Please don't say it. Don't speak the words that will destroy everything. I recognized you, but you denied it. You are supposed to be dead." Jared continued, as though she had not spoken, his voice growing stronger with each impossible recognition. "I held your funeral. I mourned you for 3 years. I built monuments to your memory and forbade your name to be spoken in this house." The assembled servants had gone deadly quiet, sensing they stood witness to something that would reshape their understanding of everything they thought they knew. Even Lorene, normally unflappable, stared with widening eyes as truth crystallized before them. "But you are alive," Jared whispered, wonder and anguish warring in his expression. "You are here, in my house, tending my son, our son, while I prepare to marry another woman." "Because you must marry her," Talia replied with quiet desperation, tears streaming down her pale cheeks. "Because Owen needs legitimacy. Because your position requires it. Because my return would destroy everything you have built from the ashes of our tragedy." "Our son," Jared repeated, the words seeming to unlock something profound in his understanding. "Owen recognized you immediately, didn't he? His supernatural gift saw through every disguise, every carefully constructed lie. He has been calling his own mother, Mama, while I stood by like a fool. He has your eyes, she whispered, her voice breaking completely. Your stubborn chin, your generous heart. Every day I see you in his face and remember what we lost, what we can never reclaim. Tell me how, Jared demanded, his control finally cracking under the weight of 3 years' worth of suppressed grief and impossible hope. Tell me how you survived, why you let me believe you were dead, why you came back as a servant in your own home. Because I died in every way that mattered, Talia replied, her voice gaining strength even as her body trembled with shock and blood loss. The woman you married, the Duchess who planned to rule beside you, she perished in that carriage fire. What survived was something broken, something changed beyond recognition. Changed how? By whom? Prison, she said simply, the single word carrying the weight of years of suffering. 5 years in a women's prison in the Northern Territories, my voice damaged by those who wanted to ensure I could never tell my story, my spirit broken by guards who took pleasure in humbling noble blood. The revelation sent a collective gasp through the assembled servants. Here was their quiet, humble maid, revealed not merely as the lost Duchess, but as a woman who had endured unimaginable hardship for reasons still shrouded in mystery. But you escaped, Jared pressed, his hands moving instinctively to comfort her, even as his mind struggled to process the impossible truth. I escaped. I tried for years to be here for my son. When I heard that my son, that the Duke of Graftonwood's heir was growing up motherless and difficult, I came here not to reclaim my place, that was lost forever, but simply to see him, to love him from whatever distance I could manage. And you found him driving away every governess, Jared said with dawning understanding, because he was waiting for his real mother to come home. As Dr. Morrison finally arrived to tend her injuries, I watched this tragic reunion unfold, with a heart heavy with the weight of love denied and hope reborn. Yet even as truth blazed between them like summer lightning, I could not shake the feeling that their greatest trials lay ahead. For if someone had gone to such elaborate lengths to destroy their happiness once, what might they do now that love had found its way home again? The autumn evening air crackled with malicious anticipation as London's finest gathered for the Earl of Blackwood's unexpected soiree. Unaware that they were about to witness a calculated assassination of reputation that would reshape the very foundations of high society. I had positioned myself strategically near the ballroom's grand entrance, my fan fluttering with dreadful certainty as the evening's orchestrated destruction prepared to unfold. Spencer had planned this night with the precision of a military campaign, sending invitations to every influential member of Parliament and their scandal-hungry wives. The setting itself spoke of deliberate theatre, crystal chandeliers casting harsh light that would spare no detail, mirrors reflecting shock from every angle, and acoustics designed to carry whispers to the furthest corners. Jared arrived with his betrothed, the radiant Celeste, though his entire demeanour spoke of a man walking toward his execution. The past weeks since discovering Tahlia's identity had transformed him from a controlled aristocrat into someone barely maintaining his facade. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, his usually immaculate appearance showed subtle signs of strain, and his hand trembled almost imperceptibly where it rested on Celeste's arm. Poor Celeste herself remained blissfully unaware of the tempest brewing around her engagement. She had attributed Jared's increasing distance to pre-wedding nerves, even commissioning a new gown for tonight's festivities. Pale silk, the colour of spring morning, chosen to complement what should have been the happiest season of her life. Ladies and gentlemen, Spencer's voice rang out above the string quartet's delicate melody, commanding attention with the authority of a man who held devastating secrets. If I might have your indulgence for a moment, I have a most illuminating tale to share, one that concerns the very nature of deception within our ranks. The ballroom fell silent, with the hungry stillness of an audience sensing scandal. Conversations died mid-sentence. Fans ceased their fluttering, and every eye turned toward Spencer's imposing figure as he stepped into the center of the dance floor like an actor claiming his stage. "For 5 years," he began, his voice carrying the practiced cadence of a master manipulator, "we have observed the Duke of Graftonwood's noble grief for his tragically lost wife. We have admired his dedication to their orphaned son, his steadfast refusal to speak of his beloved's memory, his careful preservation of their love as something too sacred for common discourse." Jared had gone deadly still, his face a mask of controlled fury as he recognized the trap closing around not just himself, but around the woman he loved and the son they shared. Across the room, I glimpsed Wyatt pushing through the crowd, clearly attempting to reach his friend before disaster struck. "Yet tonight," Spencer continued with malicious satisfaction, "I bring you evidence that this touching tale of devotion and loss was nothing more than an elaborate performance. The Duchess of Graftonwood lives, my friends, and she has spent these past months employed as a common servant while her husband courted another bride." The gasps that rose from the assembled crowd might have shattered the crystal overhead. Ladies reached for their smelling salts, while gentlemen muttered among themselves with voices that carried equal measures of shock and prurient fascination. "Surely," the Countess of Marlborough interjected, her position giving her the authority to demand proof. "You speak in hyperbole, Lord Spencer. Such extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence." Spencer's smile turned positively predatory as he produced a leather portfolio from his evening coat. "Indeed they do, which is why I have brought documentation that will satisfy even the most skeptical among you. Witness statements from servants within Graftonwood itself, correspondence proving her true identity, and most damning of all, evidence that the Duke has known of her presence throughout their elaborate charade." The world seemed to tilt on its axis as Spencer began reading from carefully forged documents that mixed truth with lies in the most devastating combination. Names, dates, and intimate details spilled forth like poison, each revelation calculated to inflict maximum damage on everything Jared held dear. "The woman known to the household as Talia," Spencer declared with theatrical flourish, "stands revealed as the rightful Duchess of Graftonwood, reduced to scrubbing floors and emptying chamber pots while her lawful husband prepared to commit bigamy with an innocent young woman." "That is a contemptible lie." Jared's voice cut through the ballroom like a blade, his composure finally shattering under the weight of accusation. "I discovered her identity mere weeks ago. Every word you speak is calculated poison designed to destroy innocent people." But the damage was already done. The court of public opinion had rendered its verdict in those crucial first moments, and Jared's passionate defense only served to confirm his guilt in their eyes. Whispers spread like wildfire through the crowd. How could he not have recognized his own wife? What manner of husband allows such degradation? Perhaps she fled for good reason after all. Celeste stood frozen beside him, her face cycling through confusion, hurt, and dawning comprehension as the impossible truth crystallized around her. "Jared," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the crowd's increasingly vicious murmurs. "Is this true? Are you already married?" The anguish in his eyes as he looked down at her innocent face provided answer enough. Celeste's composure cracked completely, tears streaming down her porcelain cheeks as the reality of her position became brutally clear. With a choked sob that cut through every heart present, she gathered her skirts and fled the ballroom, leaving behind only the echo of her heels and the complete ruin of her dreams. "And there you have it," Spencer announced with savage triumph. "The truth laid bare at last. The Duke of Graftonwood stands revealed as a man who would allow his own wife to live as a servant while courting an innocent maiden. His fitness for the ancient title he bears must now be questioned by every authority in the realm. The Ton adores tragedy, so long as it is not their own. and tonight they witnessed the complete annihilation of a man's reputation served up for their entertainment. As Jared stood alone in the centre of that glittering ballroom, abandoned by his betrothed and condemned by his peers, I saw something precious die in his eyes. Not love, for that burned stronger than ever, but the very foundation of honour upon which his entire existence had been built. The final blow came as we departed that chamber of condemnation. A messenger awaited with summons from Parliament itself, demanding that the Duke appear before a special committee to explain his conduct and determine whether his title should be stripped entirely. In the carriage returning to Graftonwood, Jared sat in absolute silence while his world crumbled around him. Yet even in this darkest hour, I sensed that love might yet find a way to triumph over the forces that sought to destroy it. In the grey hours before dawn, when shame and scandal seemed insurmountable, mountains blocking any path to redemption, I found myself witness to the moment when a broken man chose to become something greater than his circumstances demanded. The transformation began not in grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but in the quiet sanctuary of Graftonwood's nursery, where truth spoke through the innocent wisdom of a child who saw what adults had forgotten. Young Owen sat curled in his window seat, watching the mist rise from the estate's gardens while his carefully ordered world dissolved into chaos around him. The servants whispered constantly now, their voices carrying fragments of scandal and disgrace that even a 6-year-old could not escape. Though he possessed understanding far beyond his tender years, the weight of adult secrets pressed upon his small shoulders like an unbearable burden. Jared found his son there as the first pale light touched the horizon, his own face haggard from sleepless nights, spent wrestling with impossible choices that offered no salvation. The summons from Parliament lay heavy in his pocket, like a death warrant for everything he had built since tragedy first struck his house 3 years past. "Papa?" Owen said, without turning from the window, his small voice carrying a gravity that would have been heartbreaking in any other child. "Why is everyone saying terrible things about our family? Why did they make Miss Celeste cry?" The question struck Jared like a physical blow, reminding him that his son had witnessed the aftermath of Spencer's devastating revelations. He had hoped to shield Owen from the worst of the scandal, but children possess an uncanny ability to sense the emotional currents that adults attempt to hide. "Because," Jared said carefully, settling beside Owen on the padded bench, "sometimes people use truth like a weapon, twisting it to cause pain instead of bringing understanding. They speak of things they don't fully comprehend." Owen leaned against his father's side with the natural trust that remained unshaken despite the chaos around them. "But Mama isn't bad," he said with simple conviction. "She loves us. I can feel it in her heart every time she looks at us." "Mama." Jared's breath caught at his son's casual use of the forbidden word. "Talia," Owen explained patiently. "I've always wanted her to be my mama, ever since she first came here. She feels like belonging, like home, like all the love songs you used to sing when you thought I was sleeping." From the doorway came the soft whisper of fabric against wood. Talia stood there in her servant's dress, having arrived to begin her morning duties. But she froze when she saw father and son together in their moment of vulnerable honesty. "Don't go," Jared said without turning around, his voice rough with emotion that had been suppressed too long. "Please. This charade has cost us all too much already." She entered hesitantly, her hands clasped before her in that gesture of submission that had become second nature during her years of forced humility. The morning light revealed the changes her ordeal had wrought, new lines around her eyes, a wariness that had never existed in their youth, the careful way she held herself as though expecting rejection or worse. "The whole of London knows now," Jared said, stating the devastating obvious with characteristic directness. "Spencer has ensured that our private tragedy has become public entertainment. Our love transformed into scandal." "I should disappear again," Talia whispered. her voice still carrying the hoarseness that years of enforced silence had created. "Leave you to rebuild what my presence has destroyed. You can tell them I was an imposter, that the real Duchess died as you believed." "No." The word emerged with such force that both Talia and Owen jumped. "No more lies, no more hiding, no more letting fear and shame dictate our choices. I have spent 3 years in a living death, mourning a love I thought lost forever, while that love served silently under my own roof." He stood then, moving to the window where dawn painted the sky in shades of hope and determination. "They can strip me of my title, seize my lands, drag my name through every scandal sheet in London. None of it matters anymore. Your reputation," Talia began. "My reputation?" Jared laughed, but there was strength in the sound rather than bitterness. "What reputation is worth maintaining at the cost of denying the woman I love? What honor exists in allowing my son's mother to live in exile while I courted another?" He turned to face her fully, and I saw in his expression the man he had been before tragedy and pride had hardened his heart into stone. "You are my wife, Talia, not in some secret ceremony hidden from the world, but in the church where my ancestors worshipped for centuries, before God and witnesses, with vows that no earthly scandal can break. But the committee, Parliament itself, will judge me based on truth instead of Spencer's carefully crafted lies. Yes, I failed to recognize you immediately. Grief and deliberate disguise blinded me to what my heart should have known. But when understanding came, I chose love over convention, family over reputation." Owen slipped from the window seat to stand between his parents, his small hands reaching out to grasp one of each of theirs. The gesture completed a circuit that had been broken for 3 years, connecting past to present, hope to fulfillment. "We belong together," Owen said, with the absolute certainty that children possess before the world teaches them to doubt. "I knew it from the moment she came home. My heart recognized hers, just like yours will when you stop being afraid." The touch of their son's hands seemed to dissolve the careful distance Talia had maintained throughout these painful months. I watched as the walls she had built around her heart came tumbling down, as the love she had denied herself permission to feel blazed forth like sunrise after the longest night. "The world will condemn us," she whispered, but her voice carried hope now instead of resigned despair. "Let them," Jared replied, gathering both wife and son into his arms for the first time in 3 years. "We have already survived their worst efforts to destroy us. Whatever comes next, we face it as a family, united, honest, and unashamed of the love that has brought us home to each other." Even power must bow to love when pride is spent, dear listeners, and in that nursery I witnessed the exact moment when the Duke of Graftonwood chose to become simply a man willing to fight for his family against any odds. Through the window, the sun broke free of the horizon, flooding the nursery with golden light that seemed to bless this moment of reunion and resolution. The battle was far from over, but the warriors had finally chosen their side. The Houses of Parliament had never witnessed such a spectacle as the one that unfolded on that crisp November morning when the Duke of Graftonwood arrived to face the committee charged with determining his fitness to hold his ancient title. What should have been a quiet administrative hearing became instead a theatre of passion that would be whispered about in drawing rooms for generations to come. The committee chamber bristled with hostile energy as Spencer and his political allies arranged themselves like vultures around fresh carrion. They had spent weeks preparing their assault, gathering witnesses and forged documentation designed to paint Jared as either a negligent fool or a calculating deceiver who had knowingly humiliated his wife for his own convenience. Yet when the great doors opened to admit the Duke, the assembled politicians found themselves facing not the broken man they expected, but a figure transformed by love's courage. Jared entered the chamber with Talia at his side, not hidden away like a shameful secret, but standing proudly as his duchess, her hand resting on his arm with quiet dignity. She wore not the humble brown wool of servitude, but a gown of midnight blue silk that revealed the aristocratic bearing no amount of disguise could truly conceal. Her dark hair was arranged with elegant simplicity, and though the years had changed her, the woman who faced Parliament that morning carried herself with the unmistakable grace of nobility born and bred. "Your Grace," the committee chairman began with poorly concealed hostility, "you appear before us today to answer charges of conduct unbecoming a peer of the realm. How do you answer these serious accusations?" "I answer them," Jared replied, his voice carrying the resonant authority that had once commanded respect in these very halls, by presenting the truth that has been deliberately obscured by those who profit from destruction rather than justice. What followed was not the grovelling defense the committee anticipated, but a masterful exposition that laid bare 3 years of conspiracy, suffering, and ultimate triumph over forces that sought to destroy innocent love. "5 years ago," Jared began, "my wife and I were victims of an elaborate plot designed to seize our property and eliminate obstacles to certain political ambitions. Lord Spencer, whose financial difficulties had reached desperate proportions, arranged for my wife's kidnapping and apparent death while simultaneously orchestrating rumours about her supposed criminal activities." Spencer leapt to his feet, his face flushed with indignation. "These are wild accusations without foundation. I demand proof of such outrageous claims." "Gladly provided." Jared smiled with cold satisfaction as Wyatt stepped forward, bearing documents that would reshape the entire narrative. "Gentlemen, I present correspondence seized from Lord Spencer's private study, financial records detailing his debts to my estate, and sworn statements from the men he hired to stage my wife's death and arrange her imprisonment." The committee members leaned forward with sudden fascination as evidence spread across their polished table. Letters, written in Spencer's own hand, detailing payments to corrupt officials, plans for discrediting the ducal family, and most damning of all, cold calculations of how long Talia should be kept imprisoned before being discovered, in circumstances that would make her return socially impossible. "Furthermore," Jared continued as the politicians studied the damning documentation, "I present my wife herself, not as a broken woman seeking charity, but as a duchess who endured years of wrongful imprisonment and returned home through courage that humbles us all." Talia stepped forward with the grace of a queen. Her head held high despite the ordeal that had transformed her from sheltered noblewoman to survivor of unimaginable hardship. When she spoke, her voice carried clear tones that commanded attention and respect. "Honourable members of Parliament," she began, "I stand before you not to beg for mercy, but to demand justice for crimes committed against my family. For 3 years, I was held in a women's prison on fabricated charges, my voice deliberately damaged by those who sought to ensure I could never tell my story. The chamber had fallen completely silent, every man present hanging on her words as she recounted her ordeal with dignity that made Spencer's machinations appear even more despicable by contrast. I escaped my captors not to return as a beggar to my husband's door, but to serve in secret while I determined whether our son was safe and whether love could survive the crucible of forced separation. What I found was a man who had mourned me faithfully and a child whose heart recognized mine despite never having seen my face." "But surely," one committee member interjected, "the Duke's failure to immediately recognize his own wife suggests either negligence or willful blindness to her suffering." It was young Owen who provided the answer, stepping from behind his mother's skirts with the fearless honesty that had always marked his character. The sight of this small boy defending his parents before Parliament itself sent murmurs of amazement through the chamber. "Papa's heart knew her before his eyes did," Owen said clearly, his young voice carrying throughout the ornate room. "Just like mine did. Love isn't about what you see, it's about what you feel, and we felt like family from the very first day." The sight of this innocent child defending his parents with such pure conviction struck even the most hardened politicians. Several committee members exchanged meaningful glances, and I noticed more than one dabbing at suddenly moist eyes with their handkerchiefs. "The question before you," Jared said, building toward his powerful conclusion, "is not whether I deserve to maintain my title, but whether justice still exists in this realm. Will you punish the victims of an elaborate conspiracy, or will you hold accountable the man who orchestrated years of suffering for his own gain?" Spencer made one final desperate attempt to salvage his crumbling position. "Even if these documents are authentic, they prove nothing about this woman's current claims. She could have arranged this entire charade herself." "Could she?" Wyatt interjected smoothly, producing medical testimony that sealed Spencer's fate. "This statement comes from the prison physician who treated the Duchess's deliberately damaged vocal cords. His detailed medical records match exactly the testimony of the man Spencer hired to perform those barbaric procedures." The final evidence proved devastating beyond recovery. Spencer's face went ashen as he realized his carefully constructed conspiracy had unraveled completely, leaving him exposed as the architect of unprecedented cruelty against an innocent family. "Lord Spencer," the committee chairman pronounced with grave finality, "you will surrender yourself to the appropriate authorities to face charges of kidnapping, fraud, conspiracy, and assault against a peer of the realm. Your lands and titles are hereby forfeit to the crown." As Spencer was led away in chains, still protesting his innocence to deaf ears, the chairman turned to address the Duke with newfound respect and something approaching awe. "Your Grace, it is the unanimous decision of this committee that you have not only maintained your fitness for your title, but have demonstrated the very qualities that make English nobility worthy of their position. You have our profound apologies and our deepest admiration." And thus, dear listeners, London gained not merely an exonerated duke, but a family whose love had proven stronger than any force arrayed against it. As Jared, Talia, and Owen emerged from Parliament House into the afternoon sunlight, they did so not as victims of scandal, but as victors over those who sought to destroy the power of true devotion. 6 months have passed since that triumphant morning in Parliament, dear listeners, and I find myself once again within the walls of Graftonwood. Though what a transformation greets me now. Gone are the shadows and careful silences that once shrouded this great house like burial shrouds. In their place, genuine laughter echoes from every corner, warmth radiates from every hearth, and love has restored what hatred had sought to destroy forever. The portraits have returned to their proper places in the family gallery, not just Tahlia's wedding portrait, carefully restored from where Spencer had hidden it, but new paintings that capture this family in their hard-won happiness. Young Owen posed with his parents just last month, his small hand resting proudly in his mother's, while his father's arm encircles them both with protective devotion. I discovered them this morning in the very nursery where truth first stirred between them, though it now serves as Owen's private study rather than his sleeping chamber. He has grown remarkably in these months of peace, his supernatural perception channeled into scholarly pursuits that delight his tutors and fill his parents with quiet pride. "Tell me about when you came back to us," he was saying, as I paused outside the open door, drawn by the warm contentment that filled his voice like music. "About how you were so brave and clever, that you found your way home." Tahlia, the Duchess of Graftonwood in truth as well as title now, sat beside her son at his small writing desk, her voice clear and strong as she helped him practice his letters. The damaged vocal cords had healed with time and proper care, allowing her natural warmth to shine through every word. "Once upon a time," she began, her eyes sparkling with joy that had replaced the haunted wariness I remembered so well. "There lived a little boy with the most loving heart in all the world. When circumstances tried to separate him from those who loved him most, his heart remained so bright and true that it became a beacon guiding lost souls home to where they belonged. And Papa's heart remembered yours even when his mind was confused, Owen added, with the satisfaction of a child who knew his favourite story by heart and treasured every detail. And I found both of you again, Jared's voice added from the doorway. Because love is stronger than any lie, and family bonds cannot be broken by time or distance or even the cruelest deceptions. The Duke, for he remained Duke in name as well as nature, his title confirmed and his honour completely restored, had changed remarkably since that morning of reckoning. The ice that had encased his heart for 3 terrible years had melted completely, leaving behind the warm, passionate man Tahlia had fallen in love with during their youth. He crossed to his family with the easy confidence of a man perfectly at peace with his world, dropping a tender kiss on his wife's dark hair before ruffling his son's unruly locks. And what scholarly pursuits occupy our young gentleman today? I'm writing invitations, Owen announced proudly, holding up his parchment for inspection. For Aunt Celeste's wedding next month. Did you know she's marrying Wyatt? She says she's much happier now because he loves her stories and laughs at all her jokes. Indeed, sweet Celeste had discovered her own happy ending in the most unexpected way. Freed from an engagement that had brought her no joy, she had quickly realized that Wyatt's long friendship with Jared had given him ample opportunity to admire her wit and kindness from afar. His courtship had been everything a romantic heart could desire: devoted, respectful, and utterly genuine. Love should always be freely chosen, Talia said softly, her hand finding Jared's where it rested on her shoulder. Never imposed by duty or desperation, but freely given between hearts that truly understand each other. Speaking of freely given love, Jared murmured, his voice carrying particular warmth that made his wife's cheeks glow with happiness. I have something that belongs to you. From his coat pocket, he produced a small velvet box that made Talia's breath catch in joyful recognition. Inside lay the wedding ring she had worn during their brief, perfect marriage. Not an elaborate duchess's circlet heavy with diamonds and tradition, but the simple band of gold he had placed on her finger during their private ceremony in the estate chapel. I thought it was lost forever, she whispered, tears of happiness gathering in her dark eyes. As did I, until Parliament's investigation uncovered it among Spencer's seized possessions. He kept it as a trophy of his supposed victory, though I prefer to think of it as proof of his ultimate failure. Jared's smile held quiet satisfaction as he slipped the ring onto her finger where it had always belonged. He sought to destroy our love, but succeeded only in proving its indestructible nature. Are you married again now? Owen asked, with the practical curiosity of childhood that cut straight to the heart of things. His parents exchanged a look full of shared laughter and perfect understanding. We were never unmarried, my darling boy, Talia explained, raising her hand to let the restored ring catch the morning light. Some bonds are so sacred, they survive any earthly attempt to break them. We were married in the sight of God before witnesses. No human power can unmake what heaven has blessed. Besides, Jared added, with the roguish grin that had first captured his wife's heart so many years ago, your mother and I have discovered that love grows stronger when tested by fire, not weaker. The look that passed between them held promises that made my romantic heart flutter with anticipation. Already there were whispers among the servants about certain telltale signs, about the Duchess's renewed radiance that suggested the ducal nursery might welcome another addition before the year's end. As I prepared to take my leave of this restored paradise, Wyatt appeared in the doorway bearing morning correspondence. His friendship with Jared had only deepened through their shared trials, and his engagement to Celeste had created bonds that would unite their families in joy rather than mere political convenience. A letter from the Archbishop, he announced with barely suppressed excitement. It seems His Grace wishes to officially recognize the trials you've endured and the virtue you've displayed. There's to be a special service of Thanksgiving at Westminster Abbey. the first such ceremony honoring marital devotion in living memory. Recognition from the church itself, I murmured, overwhelmed by the poetry of this final vindication. What greater blessing could crown love's triumph over every force arrayed against it? Indeed, even the coldest heart may bloom again beneath the scandalous sun of love, and I have never witnessed a more complete restoration than the one that transformed Graftonwood from a tomb of grief into a temple of family joy. As I departed that blessed house, my carriage wheels carrying me back toward London's endless fascinations, I carried with me the image of a family made whole by love's unshakable determination to overcome any obstacle. Do you believe, dear listeners, that redemption can rewrite every sin of pride and fear? After witnessing the Duke's journey from despair to devotion, I am convinced that love possesses an alchemy more powerful than any earthly force. It can transform the broken into the whole, the lost into the found, and even the most impossible circumstances into inevitable joy. Until our next whispered confidence, I remain your devoted chronicler of the heart's most precious triumphs. Lady Whistledown. And if this scandal has stolen your breath, do subscribe, like and share, my listeners, for love and ruin are never far from my next report.